Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Richard Lange about Joe Hustle. Richard is a Hammett Prize winner, a Dagger Award winner, and was the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship. Welcome, Richard.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So tell the audience, before we get into talking about the book, what is a Guggenheim Fellowship?
It's awarded by the Guggenheim Foundation. You writers, painters, almost any field, they give these cash awards to, which is the good part about it. You apply and then you get 3 recommendations, and it helps. I had 3 previous winners of Guggenheims who recommended me. This was a while ago. This is when I was first starting out, like 15 years ago. So I applied and somehow I was selected, and they give you a certain amount of money. And I think in the old days, it was meant to support you like for a year of work. But they haven't raised the money and kept it up with inflation. So it's not really going to do that. But it is, it's a nice honor on one hand. And then it's the money's also helps too.
In today's world, you paid a couple of months of light bills. That's all right,
Yeah, there you go.
So now let's get into talking about Joe Hustle. So it is definitely a hard-boiled love story. And you were telling me before we started recording, the LA Times has mentioned you as a summer romance read. Is that what you told me?
Yeah, they did a little roundup of summer romance reads, and most of them were those books, with the pink cover, and they're made for the beach. I guess mine kind of has a beachy looking cover, sort of, but but they somehow Joe Hustle got included, which I'm grateful for. Anywhere I can get a new audience is great, but I imagine some people are going to be shocked when they open that up on the beach and expect a light frothy romance, and it takes a dark turn for them. But everybody can learn something new.
Absolutely. And so give the audience an overview about what Joe Hustle is about.
It's about a Iraq War veteran, ex-con. He's barely scraping. He's about 42 years old. He's barely scraping by in Los Angeles, working as a bartender, painting houses, doing odd jobs. He kind of seems like every time he gets the ball rolling, something goes wrong, usually due to his bad choices. So he's never really crawled out of a hole of just day-to-day existence. And he meets a young, wealthy woman, and they embark on a whirlwind sort of romance. It turns out they both have, problems in their lives, and they kind of complement each other, help each other out for a while, and then chaos ensues. It's what the French call an amour fou, which means a crazy love. Like these two people, they're both a little off, but they get together and sparks fly. I think of it like a Cassavetes movie, like if you've ever seen John Cassavetes movies, Woman Under the Influence, things like that. It's a book with characters like that. I was one of the influences as I was writing, and I was thinking about those films.
Cassavetes films are so wonderful. And I had mentioned earlier also that I feel like there's a bit of an influence of Barfly, that movie, in it as well.
Yeah, there's definitely Bukowski. That was one of the things. I remember when I first read him. I haven't read him in years, but this was a long time ago, back when I was a writing student. And it was very influential on me because he was the first writer I read who wasn't writing about sort of fancier things. He was writing deeply about grit and he was writing about LA, which I was very interested in LA. So, and he like a lot of this book takes place in bars and involves alcohol. In fact, it's probably safe to say that both the people are alcoholics, borderline. So it does that is a thread that also when I was writing the book, I was thinking about that.
Well, I did make a little note to sort of make a joke with you that this is certainly not a 12-step program where everybody's singing Kumbaya. That's for sure.
No, no, it's not. It's probably the opposite.
Well, and so a great thing for me, because I might attend a happy hour or several, I know the shortstop really well, and that figures into your book. And then I see that you resurrected McReds, which
Yeah.
I did not know what that was, but I took me a little dive on Google and found out
Yeah.
what it was. And I personally live around the corner from what used to be Drysdale's Dugout. So
Oh,
LA has no shortage of places to, number one, drink, and they can be upscale where your martini's $50, or it can be
yep,
neighborhood where it's $6. So
that's true.
it was
It
fun.
can. I in the interest of research, as a young man, I spent a lot of time in bars, mostly on the lower end of the scale. I think I was trying to do this, emulate do a Bukowski thing, and he was very influential on young men of my generation. And but luckily, I managed to get out of that, and I moved up to the upscales now. But
There you go. There you go. I love it. Well, and you've given me license now to say that some of my bar hopping might be a little research on a future book. So I appreciate
there
that.
you go. The shortstop's interesting. I mainly did that because the book is, I wouldn't even say it's based on the life of a friend of mine whose name was Joe, and his nickname was Joe Hustle. He wasn't much like the character in the book. He was older, but he worked at shortstop. He was a bartender there for many years, and he told me a lot of the stories, and that I used in this. He was a house painter. He lived a peripatetic life for a while, but I kind of stole a lot from him to. I like to say his spirit animates the book. It's not him exactly, as his wife's read it. She goes, well, that's not really Joe. And I'm like, no, but he is in there, and there are lots of things about him in there. So just I think it added a level of life to the book that wouldn't have been there if I'd just been straight making up stuff. I mean, I have plenty of stories of my own, but his bringing in his was a nice way to get in some realism of what a bartender's life is like, but also just to kind of remember him and honor him and think about him. So that was one fun aspect of writing the book.
Well, it was certainly enjoyable. So I know both you and I live here in Los Angeles, and it is Los Angeles, like I guess a lot of the world, but I think especially here, we're very youth oriented. And there's a point in here where Joe talks about his age being 41, 42, somewhere in that neighborhood. And when he's talking to Matt, Joe says he feels like he's at half of his life, and his little buddy Matt sort of laughs at him and is like, dude, 40, you think that's half with the life you're living? And I love that, because we live in such a youth oriented culture here that when you get to be 61, I'm certainly way past half of my life. As I like to tell people, I'm in the fourth quarter of my life. Maybe I'll have overtime, or maybe I won't. I don't know. But statistically, I'm definitely in the fourth quarter.
Yep.
But with both Matt and Emily, you give sort of I don't know the word, sort of the opposite of where Joe is. They're both in wanting to be in the movie industry.
Right.
And of course, someone 40 is sort of over the hill unless you've had a long career and you're Brad Pitt, and who's still going. So how fun was that for you as an author to play these characters off of each other?
Well, I'm older too now, and I'm 62, and I I didn't want to write a book about an old man. I haven't come to the point where I want to write that book yet. Like
Fair enough.
40 for a main character, 42 seems like a good, because 42 is old to young people, I
It
mean,
is.
it's not old. I mean, of course it's young to me now, but it's old to them. So it was fun to put him. He's this guy who's kind of maybe too old to be doing this bartending thing, running around doing this and living that life. But it was fun to put him in opposition to the young guy he works with at the bar, who they get into trouble together, and then this guy who's the book goes between chapters that tell the story of Joe and Emily, and then there are these interview chapters, which are a guy he meets at a bar who he convinces him to interview him, and he's going to make movies out of the stories of Joe's life, because Joe says, I have this very interesting life. I'll tell you the stories. You write them down. If you make any money, you split the money. But, it's a stupid bar idea. But so the half of the book is these transcripts of their late night drunken conversations where Joe's backstory comes out, and just some glimpses into his personality that you don't get in the regular story. It was really when I hate writing backstory into the thing where you have to go back and tell the story. So it was a shortcut to just get those backstories out of the way in an easy way. But it worked out well.
Well, and a great thing about those shorter portions are it's really a lot like poetry. Mm-hmm. So with each of these little tidbits, and I wrote one of them down because I loved it. This reminds me of politics. If one dog howls a lie, 10,000 spread it as the truth. And it is so true. I mean, and I think that's not just politics. I think that's a bit of life. Yep. All around. If you tell something convincingly enough, people will simply spread the word for you, whether it's true or not.
We're seeing that go on right now. So
every day of the week, sadly. So talk about the word hope. I think that Joe embodies a lot of hope. Do you feel that way as the person who created it?
I often write these characters that are living on the fringe and their lives aren't going very well. And in a lot of my fiction, that's, what I deal with. But I never want to write, a complete downer, because that's easy for one. And, who wants to see that? It seems to me that it's much more of a challenge to take these people that you think are on the downward trajectory, and you leave them in a place now where you give a glimmer of hope that maybe they're going to get better. Maybe they're going to go on. Maybe they're going on. And what I like about Joe is that he never seems to lose hope. He gets knocked down. He gets back up. He tries again. He has to he wrecks his car. He has to figure out a way to buy a new car. He, has to sell his tools to live. He has to figure out how to get to, and he's been doing this all his life. So even though he has this sort of dark, violent side that he's trying to repress and hopefully will get rid of, there's this hope for the future. And Emily sort of embodied that. It didn't work out, but knowing Joe, he's gonna find a way to keep going. And I like to leave these characters with that, because, I don't know, a message that everything sucks and that's just the way it is. A lot of people do that, and maybe I even believe that. But I don't really want to write that. It's kind of depressing, and I don't know if readers really. I mean, there's a subset that like that, but I think readers want to have an idea of hope, and especially it almost feels like I get to know these characters, and I don't want to leave them in a bad place. I like them, so I wanted to give Joe the out. That there is hope in his life.
Well, and Joe has had, in his backstory, you learn he's had a very violent past. Mm-hmm. He grew up in a violent home. Yep. He too has even been to prison. Mm-hmm. So it's one of these things that, Joe has a lot of baggage. And I think one of the things that in reading this, I've known a couple of people in my life who aren't so very dissimilar from Joe Hustle, in the fact that they don't ever seem to be able to fully get on their feet. They make some momentum, they get that way, something comes along, and sometimes it's because Joe's done a good deed for someone else. It's that, no good deed goes unpunished, that type of thing. And there are people like that, but what I love is the resilience of mankind, because Joe totally believes in love. Whether you meant to write him that way or not, I don't know, but
No?
he totally believes in love with all his heart, and he's searching for simplicity. In one scene, he wakes from a dream and he tells Matt about this perfect woman in his dream. And Matt asks what the perfect woman is like. And Joe's like, it's not about what she looks like. It's about the feeling I got from it. And you could see he was a total romantic. And I was like, oh, I love that.
And he said, if I can have that feeling in a dream, like maybe I can find it in real life, like it showed him it was there in him. So there's that hope, his hopefulness.
Yes, and so when we started this at the top, it is a bit of a gritty noir-like story. It has some really rough aspects, but it certainly has a lot of hope, humanity, and love in it. What a great job, Richard!
I'm glad that you picked up on those threads and that they resonated with you.
They do indeed. Richard, do you have a website or social media you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'm all over, but probably the easiest way is www.richlange.com is a quick and easy way.
Perfect. Again, the book is Joe Hustle. It's by Richard Lange. Highly recommended. Thank you so much for joining me, Richard.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com, on Twitter at outwithdan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.